One of the most powerful changes you can make is learning to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you. There is a difference between communicating clearly and constantly defending your existence. Toxic people often recognize the second one immediately. They notice when you feel uncomfortable with someone's disappointment. They notice when you rush to justify your decisions. They notice when you keep adding explanations because you are afraid someone might judge you. And once they recognize that pattern, they can use it. You say no, and suddenly you feel responsible for proving why you said no. You make a decision, and immediately you begin explaining every detail behind it. Someone questions your boundaries, and instead of simply standing by them, you start negotiating against yourself. This is where you give away power without realizing it. You don't need permission for every decision you make. You don't need everyone to understand your priorities. You don't need to convince someone that your boundary is reasonable before you're allowed to have it. A simple statement can be enough. I can't do that. I'm not available. That's not something I'm comfortable with. I've made my decision. Then stop. Don't fill the silence because you're nervous. Don't add 5 more reasons because their expression changed. Don't start apologizing for having a life of your own. Silence after a clear statement can feel uncomfortable at first because many people have been conditioned to believe that being understood is necessary for being respected. But it isn't. Sometimes the more you explain, the more material you give someone to argue with. You say, I can't come because I have too much work. They say, you always have work. You explain again. They challenge another part. You explain again. Eventually, the original decision becomes a debate, but imagine saying, I can't make it, and leaving it there. There is nothing to dismantle, nothing to negotiate, nothing to manipulate. This doesn't mean becoming rude or refusing to communicate. Healthy relationships require communication. If someone genuinely cares about understanding you, explain when explanation is useful. But recognize the difference between someone seeking understanding and someone seeking leverage. A healthy person can hear your decision. A controlling person may search for a weakness in it. A healthy person may be disappointed. A toxic person may try to make you feel guilty for disappointing them. Pay attention to that difference. And most importantly, stop confusing someone's discomfort with your wrongdoing. Someone being unhappy with your boundary doesn't automatically mean your boundary is unfair. Someone being disappointed doesn't mean you have betrayed them. Someone questioning your decision doesn't mean you need to reverse it. You are allowed to disappoint people. You are allowed to change your priorities. You are allowed to protect your time. You are allowed to say no without turning it into a courtroom defense. The less you explain yourself unnecessarily, the more comfortable you become with your own decisions. And something else begins to happen. People have less information to use against you. You stop revealing every insecurity. You stop announcing every plan. You stop explaining every move. You stop telling everyone exactly what you are thinking. Not because you're hiding something, because not everyone deserves unlimited access to your inner world. There is strength in privacy. There is strength in allowing people to wonder. There is strength in moving quietly while your results speak later. And toxic people often become uncomfortable when they can no longer predict your emotional reactions or extract endless explanations from you. They may ask, why? You may simply answer, because that's my decision. With your life, no anger, no performance, no need to make them feel small, just certainty. Because the moment you stop needing everyone to understand you, you become much harder to manipulate. And that is where your silence begins to become powerful. The moment you stop explaining yourself, another kind of power begins to develop, the ability to remain calm when someone is deliberately trying to provoke you. Because toxic people often don't need a logical reason to create conflict. They simply need to discover what makes you react. They watch, they test, they They make small comments. They question your decisions. They interrupt. They criticize. They create situations designed to pull emotion out of you. And if you react every time, they learn exactly how to control your attention. That is why one of the most powerful silent behaviors is becoming difficult to provoke. Not emotionless, not cold, not passive, simply controlled. Imagine someone says something insulting and waits for you to explode. They are watching your face, your voice, your body language, waiting for evidence that they succeeded. But you pause, you breathe, you look at them calmly, and you don't give them the reaction they expected. That moment changes the dynamic, because provocation only has power when it produces an automatic response. If someone can insult you and instantly make you angry, they have access to your emotional state. If someone can ignore you and instantly make you chase them, they have access to your attention. If someone can criticize you and instantly make you defend yourself, they have access to your confidence. The goal is not to become unreachable. The goal is to stop handing strangers, difficult people, or toxic personalities a remote control for your emotions. And this begins with a pause. A pause gives your mind time to catch up with your emotions. When you feel anger rising, don't immediately speak. When you receive a message designed to provoke you, don't immediately answer. When someone insults you in front of others, don't rush to prove your strength. Take a moment. Ask yourself, what response serves me? Not, how do I hurt them back? Not, how do I make them regret it? Not, how do I win? Ask, what response protects my peace and my position? Sometimes the answer is a calm sentence. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's leaving. And sometimes it's nothing at all. Silence can be powerful because it denies the other person the emotional reward they were seeking. But remember something important. Silence should not become a game. You aren't ignoring someone to manipulate them. You aren't pretending not to care, while secretly hoping they become desperate. That still gives them control because your behavior is centered around their reaction. Real emotional control means their reaction is no longer the objective. You don't need them to feel guilty. You don't need them to chase you. You don't need them to apologize. You simply decide what you will do and remain steady. This is especially important when dealing with criticism. Not every criticism is an attack. Sometimes criticism contains information you need. A powerful person can listen without immediately becoming defensive. They can take what is useful and leave what isn't. They don't allow ego to turn every disagreement into war. But when criticism becomes repeated humiliation, manipulation, or deliberate disrespect, they recognize the pattern and adjust their boundaries. That is discernment. And discernment is stronger than anger. You should also watch your body when you're being provoked. Slow your movements. Keep your voice controlled. Don't rush. Don't overexplain. Don't allow your face and tone to broadcast panic. Your body should communicate what your mind is learning. I am not controlled by this moment. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. At first, staying calm may feel unnatural. Eventually, it becomes your default. And when it becomes your default, toxic people lose one of their favorite tools, your reaction. They can speak, they can provoke, they can attempt to create chaos, but they cannot force you to participate. That is the beginning of emotional independence. And once you become unreactive, you can take the next step, deciding who deserves access to your time, your attention, and your personal world in the first place. Once you stop explaining yourself and learn to control your reactions, you begin to notice something even more important. Not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. Your time is access. Your attention is access. Your energy is access. Your private information is access. And your emotional availability is access. Toxic people become powerful when you give them unlimited access while receiving nothing but chaos in return. They know where you are, what you're thinking, what you're planning, what hurts you, what makes you angry, and exactly how much you will tolerate before finally walking away. Then they use that information to keep pulling you back into the same patterns. The solution isn't to announce that you're cutting them off. The solution is to quietly change the level of access they have. Stop telling them everything. Stop responding instantly. Stop making yourself available every time they demand your attention. Stop sharing your plans before they become reality. Stop giving them front row access to your emotions. You don't need to make a dramatic announcement. You don't need to post a message about boundaries. You don't need to tell them, "You're toxic, so I'm done with you." Sometimes the strongest boundary is simply becoming less available to dysfunction. If someone repeatedly turns every conversation into an argument, you don't have to keep having long conversations. If someone constantly asks about your private life only to use that information against you later, you don't have to keep giving them information. If someone only contacts you when they need something, you don't have to remain permanently available. If someone repeatedly disrespects your time, you don't have to keep rearranging your life for them. This is not punishment, it is selection. And powerful people understand selection. They don't necessarily hate everyone who has access to them. They simply understand that different people deserve different levels of access. Someone may be an acquaintance. Someone else may be a friend. Someone may deserve professional cooperation. Someone may deserve emotional closeness. And some people may deserve distance. Not everyone needs the same key to your life. This becomes especially important with personal information. You don't need to tell everyone your weaknesses, your fears, your financial situation, your relationship problems, or your future plans. Privacy gives you room to think. Privacy protects your decisions from unnecessary interference. Privacy also prevents people from collecting information they can later weaponize. And again, this isn't about becoming paranoid. It's about becoming intentional. Trust should be earned through patterns. Access should expand when trust grows. And when trust repeatedly breaks, access can decrease. That's a healthy response. You can be polite without being accessible. You can be respectful without being available. You can care about someone without allowing them unlimited influence over your life. And you can distance yourself without turning the distance into a performance. This is where many people make a mistake. They announce every boundary, they threaten to leave, they tell everyone how much they are changing. Then they return to exactly the same behavior. Real boundaries don't need constant announcements. They appear in your actions. You answer less when there is no reason to answer. You leave conversations that become disrespectful. You stop explaining private decisions. You stop participating in unnecessary drama. You protect your schedule. You protect your mental space. And eventually, the other person notices that something has changed. They don't have the same access anymore. They can't instantly reach you emotionally. They can't demand your attention whenever they want. They can't pull you into every conflict. They can't use your availability as proof that you will always tolerate their behavior. That is when your absence begins to communicate something your words never could. But remember, the goal is not to make toxic people fear you through intimidation. The goal is to become so grounded that their approval and access to you are no longer things you desperately need. If they respect the boundary, perhaps the relationship can continue at a healthier level. If they continue crossing it, you know exactly what to do. Reduce access again. You don't need to fight every battle. You simply need to control the doors through which people enter your life. Because when your attention becomes selective, your time becomes protected, and your private world is no longer available to everyone. Toxic behavior loses much of its power over you, and once access is no longer unlimited, you can finally step back and let people's own behavior reveal exactly who they are. There is another silent behavior that changes everything. Instead of constantly confronting toxic people, step back and watch them reveal themselves. You don't always need to expose someone's manipulation. You don't always need to tell them that you notice the contradiction. You don't need to announce that you understand what they're doing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is become quiet enough to observe. Because when you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their own behavior, patterns become visible. The person who constantly blames others begins blaming again. The person who creates drama creates another situation. The person who lies eventually contradicts themselves. The person who demands attention becomes frustrated when attention disappears. The person who disrespects boundaries eventually tests another one. You don't have to manufacture these moments. You simply stop interfering with them. This is where observation becomes more powerful than confrontation. Imagine someone constantly tells you that everyone else is the problem. Their former friends were all fake. Their coworkers were all jealous. Their previous relationships were all toxic. Every conflict somehow ends with them being completely innocent. You could argue with them. You could point out the contradictions. You could try to make them admit their responsibility. But why? Sometimes you learn more by listening. Let them tell their stories. Notice the patterns. Pay attention to how they describe people who aren't present. Pay attention to whether they accept responsibility. Pay attention to how they behave when they don't get what they want. Pay attention to what happens when you say no. Those moments reveal far more than someone's carefully prepared image. People can control their words for a while. Parts are much harder to control. This is why powerful people don't rush to label someone after one bad interaction. They observe repeatedly. One mistake may be a mistake. One bad day may simply be a bad day. One emotional reaction doesn't necessarily define a person. But repeated behavior creates a pattern. And patterns create evidence. If someone repeatedly ignores boundaries, that tells you something. If someone repeatedly gossips about everyone, that tells you something. If someone repeatedly makes promises and breaks them, that tells you something. If someone repeatedly becomes cruel when they lose control of a situation, that tells you something. You don't need a psychological diagnosis. You need observation. And there is tremendous power in allowing people to reveal themselves without constantly interrupting the process. Sometimes your biggest mistake is trying to save someone from consequences. They create a problem and you fix it. They disrespect someone and you defend them. They break a promise and you make excuses. They create drama and you calm everyone down. Eventually, you become part of the system that protects their behavior. Step back, let reality speak. If someone refuses to take responsibility, let the consequences teach them. If someone creates conflict everywhere they go, don't keep becoming their permanent firefighter. If someone repeatedly damages relationships, don't keep explaining their behavior to everyone else. You are not responsible for maintaining another person's image. Your responsibility is to understand what you are seeing and decide what it means for your relationship with them. And this is where silence becomes extremely useful. You don't have to announce every observation. You can quietly remember. You can listen. You can notice. You can compare words with actions. Then make your decisions based on the pattern. The person may never know exactly what changed. They may simply notice that you're no longer as available. You're no longer defending them. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer giving them unlimited access. And suddenly, their behavior has nowhere to hide, because when you stop participating in the drama has to stand on its own. This doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. Healthy people deserve trust. Good relationships require vulnerability, but trust should be balanced with awareness. Be open, but don't be blind. Be kind, but don't become someone's shield from consequences. Listen to what people say, but watch what they repeatedly do. And most importantly, don't become obsessed with exposing toxic people. Your goal isn't to win an investigation. Your goal is to recognize reality early enough to make wise decisions. Sometimes the strongest silent move is simply stepping back, watching carefully, and allowing a person's own behavior to answer every question you were tempted to ask. Once you learn to observe without getting pulled into the drama, your next move becomes much clearer. Stop arguing about boundaries and start enforcing them through your actions. Once you learn to observe toxic behavior without getting pulled into it, the next step is simple but difficult. Stop arguing about your boundaries and start enforcing them through your actions. Because words without action eventually lose their meaning. You can tell someone, "Don't speak to me like that." You can explain it again. You can explain why it matters. You can warn them what will happen if they continue. But if they keep crossing the line and nothing changes, they learn something very important. Your boundary is only a sentence. Powerful people understand that a boundary becomes real when your behavior changes. You don't have to threaten someone with consequences. You don't have to announce what you're about to do. You simply do it. If someone becomes disrespectful during a conversation, you can end the conversation. If someone repeatedly invades your privacy, you stop giving them personal information. If someone constantly demands your attention, you stop responding to every demand. If someone repeatedly creates unnecessary conflict, you stop participating in it. If someone continues violating your standards, you reduce their access to you. The action becomes the message. And this is where silence becomes much more powerful than dramatic confrontation. Imagine someone keeps provoking you because they know that eventually you'll argue with them for an hour. Instead of arguing, you say, "I'm not continuing this conversation," and leave. No speech, no insult, no final performance, just action. The first time, they may be surprised. The second time, they may test you again. The third time, they may realize that the old strategy no longer works. This is how boundaries become credible. Consistency teaches people what your words alone cannot. And remember, enforcing a boundary isn't about controlling another person. You cannot force someone to behave well. You can only decide what you will participate in. That distinction is extremely important. A controlling person says, "You must stop doing this." A person with healthy boundaries says, "If this continues, I will remove myself from the situation." One attempts to control the other person, the other controls their own response. That is real power. You don't need to make someone respect you. You need to decide what you will do when they don't. This also means you have to stop making empty threats. Don't say, "I'm done with you," if you're going to return 5 minutes later because you're afraid of losing them. Don't announce, "This is the last time," if you already know you'll accept the same behavior tomorrow. Don't use boundaries as emotional weapons. A boundary should be something you're genuinely prepared to enforce. That requires discipline. And discipline is what separates temporary confidence from real strength. You may feel lonely when you reduce access to someone. You may question yourself. You may wonder whether you're being too harsh. You may miss the good moments. That's normal. But discomfort doesn't automatically mean your decision is wrong. Sometimes growth feels uncomfortable because you're no longer behaving according to your old patterns. Maybe you used to answer every message immediately. Now you don't. Maybe you used to explain every decision. Now you don't. Maybe you used to chase people after conflict. Now you give yourself space. Maybe you used to tolerate disrespect because you feared being alone. Now you're willing to walk away. That isn't becoming heartless. It's becoming selective. And selective people are difficult to manipulate because their actions are consistent with their standards. They don't need to threaten. They don't need to intimidate. They don't need to constantly remind people of their worth. Their behavior communicates it. If someone respects the boundary, you can respond accordingly. If they make a genuine effort to change, you can observe whether the change lasts. But if the pattern continues, don't keep repeating the same conversation. You already have the information. Chant the access, chant the distance. Change the amount of attention you give. Chant your participation. Sometimes the strongest message you can send is not, "You will regret what you did." It is simply, You no longer have the same access to me. And you don't even have to say it. Your actions can say it for you. Because when your boundaries are enforced quietly and consistently, toxic people discover that they cannot manipulate you through endless conversations. And when they realize they can no longer control your access, attention, or emotions, their influence over you begins to disappear. The strongest form of silence is not simply refusing to speak. It is becoming so calm, independent, and secure within yourself that toxic people's approval no longer has the power to control you. This is where everything changes, because you can stop explaining yourself, remain calm when provoked, limit someone's access, observe their behavior, and enforce your boundaries. But if deep inside you are still desperate for their approval, they still have influence over you. Real freedom begins when you stop needing them to validate your decisions. You don't need a toxic person to understand you. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You don't need their apology before you move forward. You don't need them to regret losing access to you. And you certainly don't need to prove that you're stronger than them. Your strength becomes real when their reaction stops being important. Think about how much control people can have when you need their approval. You say no, then immediately worry about what they think. You create distance, then check whether they've noticed. You stop responding, then secretly hope they chase you. You establish a boundary, then feel guilty because someone became upset. You walk away, then spend the entire night wondering whether they will come back. That isn't independence. That's still emotional attachment to their reaction. The goal is different. The goal is to build a life so meaningful that you don't need someone else's approval to feel valuable. Build your discipline. Keep promises to yourself. Work when nobody is watching. Develop skills. Improve your health. Protect your attention. Strengthen your relationships with healthy people. Create goals that have nothing to do with proving someone wrong. The more you invest in your own life, the less power toxic people have over your emotional state. Because when your life is empty, drama becomes entertainment. When your confidence is weak, criticism becomes a threat. When your identity depends on approval, rejection becomes devastating. But when you have purpose, discipline, and self-respect, you don't need to participate in every emotional battle placed in front of you. You can simply continue. Someone insults you. You continue. Someone misunderstands you. You continue. Someone tries to provoke you. You continue. Someone withdraws their approval. You continue. That consistency becomes a form of power. Not because you are pretending not to care, but because you have learned that your life is bigger than one person's opinion. And this is why becoming independent can make toxic people uncomfortable. They cannot easily manipulate someone who doesn't need them. They cannot control someone who isn't afraid of losing their approval. They cannot threaten someone with rejection when rejection is no longer terrifying. They cannot create desperation where there is self-respect. They may test you. They may suddenly become kinder. They may attempt to pull you back into old patterns. They may question why you've changed. They may accuse you of becoming distant, arrogant, or cold. Don't automatically defend yourself. You don't need to become cruel. You simply need to remain consistent. If someone respects your new standards, there may be room for a healthier relationship. If they only liked you when you were easy to manipulate, their reaction tells you something important. Don't take it personally. Take it as information. And never confuse being rare with being unavailable to everyone. The goal isn't to isolate yourself. The goal is to become selective. Give your best energy to people who respect it. Give trust to people who earn it. Give vulnerability to people who handle it responsibly. Give access to people who demonstrate that they can be trusted with it. And when someone repeatedly proves that they cannot, step back without hatred. You don't have to make enemies. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to destroy their reputation. You simply remove yourself from the pattern. That is one of the most powerful silent behaviors you can develop. You become less reactive, less available to chaos, less dependent on approval, less interested in proving yourself, more disciplined, more private, more selective, more peaceful. And eventually, the people who once knew exactly how to disturb you discover something they never expected. You no longer respond the way you used to. Their insults don't control you. Their approval doesn't define you. Their absence doesn't destroy you. Their manipulation doesn't move you. Their drama doesn't become your reality. You have become emotionally independent. And that is the final lesson. The most powerful person in the room is not the one who makes others afraid. It is the one who cannot be controlled by their approval, rejection, anger, or manipulation. When you master yourself, toxic people lose their power over you.